She was 19 years old, a single mother, working double shifts just to keep the lights on and milk in the refrigerator. Nobody at that glittering party noticed her, not really. To them, she was just the girl carrying the champagne tray, but she noticed something that made her hands tremble and her heart pound so hard she could barely breathe. And in that one terrifying moment, she had a choice: stay silent and keep her job, or slip a note into a stranger's hand and risk everything she had left. She chose the note. What happened next would change both of their lives forever. But before it got better, it got much, much worse. Her name was Maya Calloway, and she had not slept more than 4 hours in 3 days. It was not because she was lazy or careless. It was because she was 19, alone, and responsible for every single breath her daughter took. Little Lily, 3 years old, with dark curly hair and her grandmother's wide, curious eyes, was the reason Maya got up every morning. She was also the reason Maya sometimes sat on the edge of the bathtub at midnight and wept silently into a washcloth, so that Lily would not hear. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building on the east side of Millbrook City, where the hallway always smelled faintly of someone else's cooking, and the radiator knocked and clanged all winter long like it had something important to say. The apartment itself was small, 1 bedroom, 1 bath, a kitchen barely wide enough for 2 people to stand in, but Maya had made it a home. She had taped Lily's drawings to the refrigerator. She had bought a second-hand rug from the church sale and placed it in the center of the living room, so Lily's feet would never touch cold tile in the morning. Small things, careful, deliberate things that said, "You are loved here." Maya's mother had passed away 2 years earlier, and her father had been out of the picture long before that. The man who had fathered Lily, a boy really 20 years old and completely unprepared for the word responsibility, had disappeared before Lily's first birthday. He had sent 1 text message, 7 words long, and Maya had never responded. She had simply folded that chapter of her life and placed it in a drawer she never opened. She worked at Harrington's, a catering company that serviced corporate events, weddings, and the occasional political fundraiser. The pay was modest, but the tips, on good nights, could carry her halfway through the week's groceries. She was quiet on the job, efficient, invisible in the way that good servers learn to be, and her supervisor, a wide woman named Brenda who wore her keys on a lanyard around her neck, had told her once offhandedly, "You're one of the reliable ones, Maya. Don't let me down." Maya had carried those words for months like a small, warm stone in her pocket. On the morning of November 14th, Brenda called her in early. There was a big job that night. A corporate celebration at the Grand Calloway Hotel. No relation to Maya's last name, just one of the universe's small, indifferent coincidences. The client was a technology company called Nexus Innovations, and the event was to celebrate 5 years of the company's existence and the announcement of a major new acquisition. It was a black-tie affair. The catering contract was worth more than Maya made in 4 months. "Best behavior," Brenda said, fixing Maya with a look over the rim of her reading glasses. "These are important people. You smile, you serve, you disappear. Understood?" "Understood," Maya said. She dropped Lily at Mrs. Pereira's apartment, the 72-year-old retired schoolteacher downstairs who watched Lily for $20 and a piece of whatever she had baked that week. Lily clung to Maya's neck for a long moment before letting go. "You'll be here when I wake up?" Lily asked, the way she always asked. "I'll be here," Maya said, the way she always promised. She kissed her daughter's forehead, straightened her uniform, and walked out into the cold November air. The Grand Calloway Hotel was 14 blocks north. Maya walked because the bus fare was $1.60 each way, and she had learned to make every dollar count twice. She did not know, as she walked beneath the pale city lights with her breath rising in small clouds before her, that this night would be the one that divided her life into before and after. She did not know that a man was going to die that night, or nearly so, and that she was the only person in that glittering room who would see it coming. She did not know any of that yet. She only knew she was tired, she was cold, and she had a little girl sleeping 3 floors below the stars who needed her to come home. That was enough. That was everything. The Grand Calloway Hotel was the kind of place Maya had only ever seen from the outside. She had walked past it 100 times, past its polished brass doors and the uniformed doorman who stood like a statue in the cold, and she had never once imagined being inside it. Now she moved through its service entrance, down a corridor of white tile and fluorescent light, and emerged into the preparation area behind the ballroom, where dozens of servers were lining up trays and straightening bow ties and receiving last-minute instructions from event coordinators with clipboards. The ballroom itself, when Maya first stepped inside to set up, took her breath away. It was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling painted with clouds. Round tables were draped in white linen and set with china and silver that caught the light and scattered it like 1,000 tiny stars. Along the far wall, a string quartet was warming up, soft, elegant notes that seemed to belong to an entirely different world than the one Maya lived in. Everywhere she looked, there was beauty. Careful, expensive, deliberate beauty. And for just a moment, Maya allowed herself to simply stand there and absorb it. Then Brenda appeared at her elbow. "Champagne station, Maya. Let's go." The guests arrived at 7 o'clock sharp. They came in like a tide. Men in dark tailored suits, women in gowns of every color, all of them carrying themselves with the easy confidence of people who had never once worried about the electricity bill. Maya moved through them silently, her tray of champagne flutes steady and level, her smile fixed and professional. She was invisible, as Brenda had instructed, and she was good at it. The guest of honor arrived at 7:15. His name was Jonathan Rains, and the room changed when he walked into it the way a room always changes when someone important enters. A slight shift in posture, a subtle turning of heads, a ripple of awareness that moved through the crowd like a current through water. He was 27 years old, with dark hair and a face that was handsome in a way that seemed almost accidental, as if he had not tried for it and had been mildly surprised by the result. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie, the collar of his white shirt open, and there was something in the way he moved, relaxed, unhurried, eyes taking in the room with quiet intelligence. That made him seem both powerful and completely unimpressed by his own power. Maya noticed him because everyone noticed him. Then she went back to her tray. She did not think about Jonathan Rains again for the next 40 minutes. She served. She smiled. She disappeared. It was during her third pass through the room, moving along a far wall near the corridor that led to the private bar and kitchen, that she heard something she was not meant to hear. Two men were standing in the narrow alcove beside the corridor entrance. They were speaking in low voices, deliberately low, the way people speak when they are aware that sound travels. Maya slowed, not out of nosiness, but because one of them had shifted position and was now partially blocking her path back to the kitchen. She paused, holding her tray, waiting for a gap to move through. And she heard 6 words. 6 words that sent a cold wave of clarity washing over every inch of her body. The bottle on his private table. And then, by the end of the night, it's done. And then a short, quiet laugh that made her skin tighten. She did not hear everything. She did not need to. The tone of those words, the careful flatness of them, the laugh that followed. Maya had grown up in hard places. She recognized the sound of something very wrong. She moved away before they could notice her. Her tray was trembling. She steadied it with both hands and walked back toward the service corridor, her heart hammering behind her sternum. She stopped just inside the kitchen entrance. She needed to think. Clearly, quickly. She thought about Brenda, about her job, about Lily asleep at Mrs. Pereira's apartment, about the $20 she owed for tonight's childcare and the electric bill due on Friday and the $6.40 currently sitting in her checking account. Then she thought about a man in a charcoal suit standing in a glittering ballroom, reaching for a glass he did not know was waiting for him like a trap. Maya pressed her back against the kitchen wall and closed her eyes for exactly 4 seconds. Then she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her order pad, tore a small square of paper from it, bound the pen tucked behind her ear, and she began to write. The note said 4 things. Do not drink anything from your private table tonight. I overheard 2 men near the east corridor. I believe someone means to harm you. Please leave. A waitress who doesn't want to lose her job but can't stay silent. That last line, she almost crossed it out. She left it because it was true, and she had a feeling this man would respond better to honesty than to drama. Getting to him was the difficult part. Jonathan Rains was surrounded. He was always surrounded. a slow orbit of colleagues, board members, and well-wishers who moved with him through the room like planets around a sun. Maya watched him from the periphery for nearly 8 minutes, tracking the patterns of movement, waiting for a gap. Her hands would not stop trembling. She thought of Lily. She thought of the drawings on the refrigerator. She thought of the way Lily said mama in the dark when she had a bad dream. The sound of it, pure, absolute trust. And something steadied inside her. She picked up a fresh tray from the kitchen station and walked directly toward the center of the room. A space opened near the edge of Jonathan's orbit. His back half turned, the man beside him distracted by a passing colleague. Maya stepped in. Mr. Rains. He turned. Up close, he was younger looking than she expected, and his eyes were sharp, the kind of eyes that assessed a situation quickly and completely. Yes? His voice was calm, courteous. She held out the tray with one hand. With the other, she pressed the folded note against his palm in one smooth, practiced motion, the kind of thing you learned to do when you'd spent a year carrying trays through crowded rooms. "Your champagne, sir," she said clearly, for the benefit of anyone watching. And then, quietly, so only he could hear, "Please read that privately. Right now." His fingers closed around the note. His expression did not change, not a flicker, and she understood in that moment that this was a man who knew how to receive unexpected information without betraying himself. "Thank you," he said, and picked up the glass from her tray. Maya walked away. She did not look back. She went directly to the kitchen, set down her tray, and gripped the edge of the prep counter until her knuckles whitened. Her pulse was so loud in her ears she could barely hear the clatter of the kitchen around her. 30 seconds passed. A minute. She was trying to decide whether she had just done the bravest thing of her life or the most foolish thing. When Brenda appeared in the kitchen doorway with an expression Maya had never seen on her face before. "Maya." Brenda's voice was strangely careful. "There's someone asking for you." Maya turned, and the doorway beside Brenda stood one of Jonathan Rains' people, a tall woman in a navy blazer with the particular efficient stillness of someone in security. "Would you come with me, please?" the woman said. Maya thought of Lily. She nodded, and she followed. She was taken to a small private room off the main corridor, a manager's office from the look of it, and Jonathan Rains was already there, standing behind the desk, the unfolded note in his hand. He had not touched his champagne. There was a second man in the room, older, silver-haired, who she would later learn was Jonathan's personal attorney. Jonathan looked up when she entered. He studied her for a moment the way he had studied the room when he walked in, quickly, completely. "Tell me exactly what you heard," he said, word for word. And Maya told him. Every word, every syllable. The room was very quiet when she finished. Jonathan set the note down on the desk. He looked at the attorney. Something passed between them, a look that carried the weight of a conversation too large for this moment. Then he looked back at Maya. "You could have said nothing," he said. It was not a question. "I have a daughter," Maya said. "She's 3. She watches everything I do." She paused. "I couldn't." Jonathan Rains was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What is your name?" "Maya Calloway." He nodded slowly, as if filing this away with great care. "Maya Calloway," he said, "please don't go anywhere tonight." What Maya had stumbled into was not, as she had first feared, a random crime. It was, as Jonathan's security team would discover over the next several hours, something much more calculated and much more cold. 2 of Nexus Innovation's senior board members, men named Harlan Voss and Douglas Merritt, had been quietly siphoning money from the company's overseas accounts for nearly 18 months. The amount Maya would learn much later was staggering, the kind of number that made her physically dizzy when she heard it. $42 million, moved in careful increments through a series of shell companies in countries whose names she had only seen on geography tests. Jonathan had been close to discovering it, closer than they knew. An independent audit he had commissioned 3 weeks earlier had begun to surface irregularities, and Voss and Merritt had learned of it through a mole inside the auditing firm. They had decided, with the cold arithmetic of men who had convinced themselves that money was worth more than a human life, that it was easier to remove Jonathan than to undo what they had done. The champagne at Jonathan's private table had been tampered with during a window of less than 7 minutes. between the sommelier's last check and the beginning of the reception. It had been done by a third party, a hired hand whom security would spend 3 days tracking down. The substance added was not immediately lethal, but it was serious enough, and paired with Jonathan's known sensitivity to certain compounds, information Voss had accessed through Jonathan's medical file, which he had obtained improperly. It would have put him in the hospital, or worse. Maya learned most of this in pieces, fragments shared with her in that private room and in the hours that followed, as Jonathan's attorney coordinated with law enforcement and the hotel went about its glittering party entirely unaware that anything had occurred. The two men in the alcove were quietly and professionally escorted from the premises before the main course was served. Voss and Merritt, still circulating among the guests with their champagne and their careful smiles, were approached by plainclothes officers as the dessert was being cleared. Maya watched none of it. She was sitting in the private room with a cup of tea someone had brought her, her uniform still neat, her order pad still in her apron pocket, thinking about the fact that her feet hurt and that Mrs. Mose Pereira would want to be in bed by 11. When Jonathan returned to the room at 10:30, he looked different than he had during the party. Not shaken, exactly, but stripped of something. The careful social ease was gone. He looked like what he actually was, a 27-year-old man who had just discovered that people he had trusted had tried to kill him. He sat down across from Maya. He was quiet for a moment. "Are you all right?" he asked. And the thing that surprised her was that he seemed to genuinely mean it, to be actually curious about how she was, Maya Calloway, the waitress, and not simply performing politeness. "I need to get home to my daughter," she said honestly. He almost smiled. "I'll have someone drive you. I don't need Maya." He said her name the same careful way he had said it earlier, as if it mattered. "You walked into a room full of powerful people and you did the right thing at considerable personal risk. The least I can do is make sure you get home safely." She looked at him for a moment. He looked back at her without pretense. "Okay," she said. "Thank you." She was home by 11:15. Mrs. Pereira was awake, sitting in her armchair with her rosary and a crime novel, and she looked at Maya with old, perceptive eyes and said, "You look like someone who's been through something." "I'm all right," Maya said. She checked on Lily. Her daughter was asleep on her back, one arm flung wide, lips slightly parted, breathing in the slow, absolute rhythm of a child who trusts the world entirely. Maya stood in the doorway for a long time looking at her. Then she went to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub and shook for a few minutes until the shaking stopped. Then she washed her face, brushed her teeth, and went to bed. She had no idea that by morning her name would be in the hands of lawyers, investigators, and one particular 27-year-old man who had decided, with the same quiet certainty with which he made all his decisions, that he was not finished with the conversation. The next 3 days were the hardest of Maya's life in a different way than hard days usually were. Brenda called on the morning after the party. Maya stood in her kitchen, Lily watching cartoons in the other room, and listened to Brenda's voice on the phone, with her heart very still inside her chest. "I'm going to need you to come in," Brenda said. "There's been a complaint." The complaint, it turned out, had been filed by the Nexus Innovations event coordinator, a woman named Patricia Shields, who was furious that a member of the catering staff had interfered with the event and caused a disturbance. The fact that the interference in question had potentially saved a man's life did not appear in Patricia Shields' complaint. The complaint focused on the disruption, the optics, the potential liability. Maya sat in Brenda's office and listened to all of this. Brenda looked uncomfortable, which was unlike her. Her keys were very still on their lanyard. "I don't have a choice, Maya," Brenda said. "The client is threatening to pull our contract." "I understand," Maya said. "It's temporary," Brenda said, and it sounded like she was trying to convince both of them. "Just until this settles down." Maya was suspended from the catering roster for 2 weeks without pay. She walked home carrying that information in her chest like a stone. The electric bill was due Friday. She had $23 in her checking account. She had half a box of pasta and a can of tomatoes in the pantry. Lily needed new shoes. Her toes were pressing against the front of the ones she had, and Maya had been telling herself for 2 weeks that she'd get to it next paycheck. She sat on a bench in the park 2 blocks from home because she needed 10 minutes outside her own walls, and she pressed her fingers against her temples and breathed. She thought about calling the one friend she had who would answer, a girl named Desi from her old high school who was working at a nail salon and had a good heart, but very little she could spare. She thought about the food bank on Clement Street, which she had used twice before and hated using, not from pride exactly, but from the specific grief of watching the distance between where you are and where you wanted to be grow wider instead of narrower. She did not cry. She had learned a long time ago that crying felt like spending something she couldn't afford to spend. Instead, she pulled out her phone. There was an email she had been ignoring since that morning. It had come from an address she did not recognize, a domain that, when she'd squinted at it, had looked corporate and formal. She had set it aside the way you set aside things that require more courage than you currently have. She opened it now. Dear Miss Calloway, my name is Rachel Huang and I serve as executive assistant to Jonathan Rains, CEO of Nexus Innovations. Mr. Rains would like to arrange a meeting at your earliest convenience. He wishes to speak with you personally. Please reply to this email or call the number below at your convenience. He is aware that your time is valuable and is grateful for your flexibility. Maya read the email 3 times. She thought about what Jonathan Rains had said to her in that small room. You walked into a room full of powerful people, and you did the right thing at considerable personal risk. She thought about $23 in her checking account. She thought about Lily's toes pressing against the fronts of her shoes. She wrote back, I'm available tomorrow morning before 10 a.m. The reply came in 4 minutes, 9 a.m. A car will come to your address. She stared at that for a moment. She had not given them her address. Then she remembered the catering company's employment records. Jonathan Rains, she was beginning to understand, was very thorough. She closed her phone, got up from the bench, and walked home. Lily heard her key in the lock and came running from the living room with a drawing she had made. A house with a yellow sun and 2 figures, one tall and one small, their hands connected by a single crayon mine. That's me and you, Mama, Lily said, holding it up. Maya took the drawing. She held it for a moment. It's perfect, she said. That night she put Lily to bed, and then she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea and looked at the drawing, and she let herself believe, just barely, tentatively, like pressing one careful toe onto ice you aren't sure will hold. She let herself believe that something might be about to change. The car that arrived the next morning was black and quiet and immaculate, and the driver held the door open without comment, and Maya got in feeling simultaneously grateful and deeply out of place. She had left Lily with Mrs. Pereira, who had waved away Maya's apology about the early hour with a hand and the words, I've been awake since 5. The birds don't care that I'm 72. Nexus Innovations occupied 14 floors of a glass building in the financial district. The lobby was all polished stone and clean lines, and the woman at the front desk, Rachel Huang, who turned out to be brisk and kind in equal measure, met Maya at the elevator and brought her up to the 22nd floor. Jonathan was already in the conference room when she arrived. He stood when she came in. He was wearing a simpler outfit than the night of the party, a gray sweater, dark trousers, and he looked, without the architecture of a formal event around him, both younger and more real. Thank you for coming, he said. Thank you for the car, Maya said, because it was true, and because she had always believed in naming things you were grateful for. They sat across from each other at the long conference table, and for the first several minutes, Jonathan simply listened. He asked her to tell him everything, not just what she had heard that night, but what had happened after, with her job, with Brenda, with the complaint. Maya told him, plainly, without embellishment, without asking for anything. She was not there to ask for things. She was not entirely sure why she was there, except that it felt important to follow this thread wherever it led. When she finished, Jonathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I want to do something for you, but I want to do it right. And I want to be transparent about what I mean by that, because I've had enough of people doing things behind other people's backs to last me a very long time. Maya folded her hands on the table and listened. He had spoken, he said, with Brenda's company. He had communicated clearly that the complaint filed against Maya was not one he endorsed, and that the disturbance in question had, in fact, prevented a serious crime. The complaint had been withdrawn that morning. Maya's suspension had been lifted. Her 2 weeks of missed pay would be covered. Maya absorbed this. Thank you, she said carefully, But that, Jonathan said, was not the real reason he had asked her here. He had spoken with his board, the remaining honest members of it, which now constituted the majority, and he had a proposal. Nexus Innovations had a community foundation arm, a small philanthropic branch that funded scholarships, vocational training, and family support programs in Millbrook City. It had been underfunded and frankly underprioritized during the period that Voss and Merritt had been active on the board. Jonathan intended to change that significantly. He was looking for someone to serve as a community liaison, a bridge between the foundation and the neighborhoods it was meant to serve. Someone who understood, from the inside, what working families actually needed and what they didn't. Someone with good instincts, clear judgment, and the particular kind of courage that could not be taught in a business school. The position came with a salary, full benefits, and a flexible schedule compatible with parenting a young child. He slid a folder across the table. Maya did not open it immediately. She looked at it. Then she looked at him. "Why me?" she asked, not suspiciously, genuinely. "Because you walked into a ballroom full of people with more money and more power than you," Jonathan said, "and the only thing you were thinking about was whether it was the right thing to do." He paused. "That is extraordinarily rare." Maya opened the folder. She looked at the number on the first page. She set the folder down very carefully, because her hands had started to shake again. "I don't have a college degree," she said. "I know. I'm 19. I know that too. I have a 3-year-old. Rachel tells me her name is Lily," Jonathan said, and he said it with a small, genuine smile, "and that she makes excellent drawings." Maya looked down at the folder. She thought about the electric bill. She thought about the shoes. She thought about the drawing on her refrigerator, and the face Lily made when something made her laugh. Full body, uninhibited, like joy was a thing she had entirely too much of and couldn't contain. She thought about her mother, who had worked 2 jobs until her back gave out, and had still found time to teach Maya that integrity was the one thing no one could take from you. "Can I have a day to think about it?" Maya asked. "Of course," Jonathan said. She thought about it for exactly 4 hours. Then she called Rachel Huang and said yes. The story did not end with the job offer. Stories never end where they seem to. There was a press conference 3 weeks after the party at the Grand Callaway Hotel, where Nexus Innovations made a formal public statement about the attempted poisoning of their CEO, the fraud committed by Voss and Merritt, both of whom had been arrested and charged, and the company's cooperation with ongoing investigations. Jonathan stood at the podium in front of a room full of cameras and reporters and said everything that needed to be said with a kind of steady, unadorned honesty that made people lean forward and trust what they were hearing. Near the end of his statement, he paused. He looked directly at the camera and he said, "I want to acknowledge a debt I can never fully repay." A young woman, a single mother working a catering shift, saw something, heard something, and chose to do something about it. She did not have to. She had every reason not to. She had everything to lose and, as far as she knew, nothing to gain. Her name is Maya Callaway, and she is the reason I am standing here today. The foundation work she is now leading on behalf of Nexus Innovations is, I believe, the beginning of a long and extraordinary contribution to this city. I wanted the world to know her name. Maya watched the press conference on her phone, sitting on the floor of Lily's room while Lily napped. She had known it was coming. Jonathan had told her in advance, and she had told him it wasn't necessary. He had said, "I know it isn't necessary. That's not why I'm doing it." The calls that came after the press conference were overwhelming, from news outlets, from community organizations, from old acquaintances who had not thought of her in years. Maya let most of them go to voicemail and answered the ones that seemed to offer something real. The one call she answered immediately was from Desi, who said, "I saw it. I'm crying in the break room. You have to come over this weekend. I'm making that chicken pasta thing." Maya laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks. The work at the foundation was not glamorous. It was meetings and spreadsheets and community forums and phone calls and walking door to door in neighborhoods she knew, gathering information, listening, actually listening to people who were used to being spoken at and not heard. It was exhausting in a different way than catering had been exhausting, deeper, more demanding in places she hadn't known she had. But at the end of each day she drove home in the reliable second-hand car she had been able to finally buy. and she picked up Lily from the daycare center 3 blocks from the office, and they had dinner together every night, and the lights were always on, and the refrigerator was always full, and the rent was always paid. Small things, enormous things. Jonathan came to 2 of the community forums that first year. He sat in the back row and listened. He did not try to run the room. Afterward, he and Maya would sometimes talk over coffee, first formally, in the way of 2 people who are careful with each other, and then gradually, with less formality and more honesty, the way it goes when 2 people keep showing up to the same conversations long enough. He asked about Lily often. She brought Lily to the office Christmas party, and Lily spent 45 minutes following Jonathan around, asking him questions about everything she could see. What's that machine? What does that button do? Why is that man's tie red? Jonathan answered every question with complete seriousness, as if she were asking about matters of great importance. Which, Maya thought, watching them, she was. Every question a child asks is a matter of great importance. Love, when it came the way real things tend to come, not all at once in a single blazing moment, but in accumulation, in small recognitions, in the way Jonathan looked at Maya when she said something true, in the way Maya felt, in his presence, both entirely herself and somehow more than she had been before, in the way Lily reached for his hand one afternoon in the park without thinking about it, the way children reach for things that feel safe. There was an evening, 2 years after the night at the Grand Callaway Hotel, when Maya and Jonathan were sitting on the small porch of the house she had moved into, a real house, with a yard where Lily could run, and Lily was inside watching a movie and the neighborhood was quiet, and Jonathan turned to Maya in the particular way he had when he was about to say something he'd been thinking about for a while. He proposed simply and without theater, a ring that was beautiful but not ostentatious, words that were his own and no one else's. Maya said yes, the way she had said yes to the job, the way she had written that note at the party, not from certainty about outcomes, but from certainty about character, his, hers, the shape of what they were together. They were married the following May, in the garden of a small bed and breakfast outside the city, on a Saturday when the weather was warm and clear and the light came through the trees in long golden slants. Lily was the flower girl. She walked very seriously down the aisle with her basket of petals, and then, when she reached the front, she looked up at Jonathan and said, in a stage whisper that everyone heard, "I didn't drop any. I was very careful." And the whole small crowd laughed, and Jonathan reached down and picked her up, and the photographer, who would later tell them it was the best shot he had ever taken, captured the 3 of them in that moment, Lily laughing with her whole face, Jonathan holding her easily and looking at Maya, and Maya looking at both of them with the expression of someone who has come through something long and hard and arrived somewhere she did not dare imagine at the beginning. There is a kind of courage that does not look like courage at first. It does not come wearing armor. It does not announce itself. It shows up in a worn waitress uniform carrying a tray, heart pounding, with a 3-year-old asleep across the city and $23 in a checking account, and every reason in the world to stay quiet. Maya Callaway was not looking to be a hero. She was looking to get home to her daughter. But she had been raised to believe, by a mother who no longer lived to see it, that integrity is not situational. It does not ask whether you can afford it. It asks whether you have it. She had it. She proved it on a November night in a ballroom with 6 words she overheard that she never should have heard and a small square of paper torn from an order pad. What this story teaches us is not that every brave act leads to a fairy tale. Life is not always that generous, and anyone who has lived long enough knows that well. What it teaches us is this: doing the right thing is never wasted. It may cost you something. It may frighten you. It may put you in a room full of people with more power than you, holding a folded piece of paper, wishing your hands would stop shaking. But it is never wasted. Maya's daughter, Lily, will grow up knowing the story of that night, not because it will be told to impress her, but because it is the answer to the question every child eventually asks: who are you really? Who were you before I knew you? And the answer, in Maya's case, is the same as it is now. She was someone who could not stay silent when silence would have been easier. She was someone who loved her child enough to show her, by example, what a life of integrity looks like. She was someone who slipped a note into a stranger's hand and changed 2 lives, and perhaps many more forever. Whatever room you walk into today, whatever tray you are carrying, whatever impossible weight, remember Maya Calloway. Remember that the smallest act of courage can rewrite everything. And remember, you already have what it takes. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you love or something you believe, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so that more stories like this one can find their way to you. We will see you in the next one.